While productive commercial grapevines are usually like 25-year-old at maximum, and then their fruit yield starts diminishing, it's said that the older vines have the best quality grapes and the best quality wine. There are vines in the world that are 450 years old. In the centre of London, there's a 250-year-old vine still producing grapes. Grapevines are often just 120 centimetres tall, 4 foot, but you do get 9 foot tall grapevines, and it's that's very unusual but fairly more commonplace in Portugal. I think it's partly that it can have a double purpose. All those leaves that it produces can give a bit of shelter from the sun and perhaps the wind and the rain as well. Every farm would produce their own, and on the sides of the roads you see old vineyards laid out in a way that isn't set as highest commercial yield possibility. It's not machinery accessible. There's patches where vines must have been removed. Rather than rows, the vines are packed in like a diamond fashion so that they're equidistant from each other, and the person, the picker, the pruner, moves in amongst and between them. This is an old vernacular system, and the quality of those wines that were produced was probably quite vernacular in itself. Not everything was Duoro Valley quality. French know-how of wine, you shouldn't be too surprised that they've moved into the Portugal wine trade in high and low-profile cases. The French expertise with wine, I think, is improving the quality of Portuguese, and undoubtedly the profitability, the marketing. Wine labels are written in Portuguese and in French. Increasingly, this perhaps gives them more of a credibility in a world market. Portuguese wine has always had its place, don't get me wrong. I couldn't help but wonder if the scandal of France, where wines of non-French origin have been given the prestige of that denomination, might possibly have come from here. But there's many a French vigneron that would like to do it for themselves. And there's also the more moneyed enterprises, shall we say. But wine is perhaps one of the most obvious, but there's many French business persons, entrepreneurs, that are making their way in the Portuguese economy that generally presents a higher rate of return for them than back home. Les mousquetaires, the Mousquetaires is the biggest supermarket chain in France, linked with DIY store and fuel. They're everywhere in Portugal. It's a worldwide expansion that didn't exist, apart from the one chap and 73 others before 1973, in France itself. After Salazar, the Portuguese dictator, had had his time, and the few sensible army officers enabled the Carnation Revolution of 1974, the French language, the lingua franca, was what was taught in Portuguese schools as a foreign language. Similarly, a supporter of socialism is probably why. High-level alliances. That France isn't always the most profitable place to do business, though labour costs are reasonable and living costs help with that. France is very stable. French businesses can look elsewhere to other countries to expand and aim for higher profit margins than domestically. Serious and sustained investment isn't achieved overnight with 1 or 2 terms of political office. Portugal and France have a special relationship. Britain and France have an entente cordiale. I like to think American and Britain's special relationship isn't quite as benevolent coloniser as France and Portugal relationship seems to be. Well, America is always more of a poisoned chalice. Everywhere you go in Portugal, there's French businesses, very prominent. These are the supermarket chains. all of them, and DIY stores, small builders, merchants, suppliers, some restaurant chains. It might not be immediately apparent to everyone, but perhaps it's partly my architect's eye. There seems to be a cooperative efficiency between the whole group, I think they must be, the French group of companies, in and around more rural towns. There's a block of land that will have a French supermarket, a French DIY store, a French retail park outside of a town, very much on the lack of town planning French model. They're quite efficient little spaces in a small pocket of land. These French companies' expansion into Portugal is deep. It's not just into the cities, it's in lots of little towns all over the country. That's obviously been going on for quite some decades. Well, since 1974. It's not like how the British supermarkets in Britain would buy up land banking to stop the competition from getting a foothold. But there are very few Portuguese supermarkets can go both. Usually they're still in town, few and far between, mainly in cities. Self-service supermarket fuel stations offer considerable saving. Leclerc, Carrefour are all here, but the Intermarché, smaller model, suits much of Portugal better. France fits better for Portugal, providing something in the way of luxuries, a little bit like how it's so much easier to get things from China than actually developing a product yourself as a nation. Portugal itself promotes itself as a stepping stone to Brazil. What Brazil thinks about this, I'm not too sure. While in Napoleon's day, Portugal was siding with the English for a bit of protection from Spain, Napoleon only ever really having nothing more than a light touch in Portugal. France's presence now is wide and deep and utilitarian and technical high-tech, perhaps giving some indication of Portugal's purchasing power, or lack of. In every town there's a China warehouse shop, a large Chinese proprietor-owned warehouse that stocks a lot of affordable everyday staples and everything you ever need type shop. It does seem strange to see they're often full of stock and empty of people, so much so that it made me wonder as if it was a legal face of some unknown criminal activities, like money laundering facility, or I think my imagination's running away with me. Be honest with me though, your imagination went down the road of China shop. Was he going to start talking about the tiles of Portugal? Portugal's famous for its tiles and ceramics, isn't it? In French supermarkets in France, I have quite often found that they have rather substandard products in the way of phone charger cables or something like that. Depending how the Portuguese economy and world economy goes, digital nomads from America will be making houses too unaffordable for locals to rent, and the native population drift more towards the foothold that Chinese second-generation immigrants that have got funding from back home and struggling still can offer in the way of substandard products, rather than the more aspirational French-selected Chinese substandard products. Will it be Intermarché or real China that's set up in the Brazilian rainforest, providing everything the local cocoa, coffee, cocaine and beef farmer needs for their once virgin rainforest plantation? Is it any more eco-ethical of me to drink tea rather than coffee, though? Yes, I think it is just about. More on why in another episode. Ancient Greeks and others had trading footholds in Portugal. British saw their port industry that was a currency of exchange similar to gold at the time and thought, we'll have that. You get the sense that China now is scavenging for what it can at a loss leader level with the hope of something more, and France has charmed its way in, wide and deep. Its overseas foreign workers would hardly recognise the place if they had the inclination to come home.